The sun was a low, burning ember on the horizon, spilling gold and fire over the rugged plains where the wind whispered through the tall grass. In the tiny, dust-choked town of Red Mesa, life was hard, simple, and unforgiving. People's faces were carved by years of sun and struggle, and kindness was a rare gift. Among them lived a young woman named Allura, whose beauty, or what the town considered beauty, was never praised. She moved like a shadow through the narrow streets, unnoticed, her quiet presence often met with cruel whispers from neighbors and even her own kin. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, carried stories the world refused to see. Her father, a man hardened by years of debt and disappointment, saw her not as a daughter, but as a burden, a reflection of his own failures. When the town's rumor mill judged her unattractive, he made a decision that would change everything. Allura's father arranged for her to marry a man outside their world, a stranger with a name that rolled like distant thunder, Tavok, a warrior of the Apache. The whispers around town were sharp and cutting. Who would want her, they said, married to a man who doesn't even belong here? Yet Tavok was no ordinary man. He carried a strength in his eyes and a quiet patience in his movements, the kind that made the wind pause when he walked. To most, Allura was unworthy. To Tavok, she was a mystery waiting to be uncovered, a soul no one else dared to understand. The wedding day was unlike any the town had seen. The sun fell hard across the dry earth, the air thick with dust and tension. Allura's dress was plain, stitched by hands that didn't hope for admiration, and her heart pounded like a caged drum. Tavok arrived not with grand ceremony, but with a presence that demanded respect. His gaze met hers, calm and unwavering, and something stirred inside her that she hadn't felt before. It was not a gaze of pity, nor of obligation, but of deep, quiet recognition. He saw her for what the world refused, to a young woman strong in ways invisible to those who only looked at the surface. Even as the preacher's words were spoken, Allura could feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on her like a storm cloud. Families whispered behind fans and hands, and she thought she would shrink under their scorn. Yet Tavok's hand on hers was solid, grounding, as if to say, "You do not have to carry this alone." He spoke no grand words, only a single nod that promised loyalty, protection, and perhaps something more, the kind of love that legends are made of, the kind that does not wait for beauty to arrive. In the days that followed, the tension between Allura and her new life pressed close. Red Mesa's dusty streets seemed smaller, the people's eyes sharper, yet Tavok's world, just beyond the edge of the plains, promised something different. The Apache camp was a place of silence and fire, of stories carried by the wind and songs sung to the stars. It was there that Allura would begin to understand what her father could never teach her: the quiet power of being seen, of being valued not for the way she looked, but for the heart she carried. Tavok did not force his world upon her. He offered it as a hand extended, a choice made with care. Each morning, as the sun rose over the hills, he taught her how to ride through the open fields, how to listen to the language of the wind, how to respect the quiet strength of the land. Allura, in turn, discovered a courage she did not know she possessed. Where the town had mocked her, Tavok encouraged her. Where the world had told her she was unworthy, he whispered that she was exceptional, the kind of soul who would change hearts not with beauty but with depth. But life was never simple on the frontier. The town of Red Mesa did not easily let go of its judgments, and Allura could feel the old whispers following her, threading through the tall grass like snakes waiting to strike. Tavok sensed it too, his protective hand often resting over hers in silent warning. Yet there was a spark between them, a pull neither dared name fully, that made the dangerous world feel alive in a way it never had before. Nights by the fire brought stories and laughter, shared silences and subtle glances, moments where the cold distance of their world seemed to melt away. In those fleeting hours, Allura could feel something growing, a love, fierce and unyielding, one the town could neither mock nor understand. The problem, however, was that the world outside Tavok's camp was not ready to accept them. Rivals from neighboring towns eyed the Apache with suspicion, and the lawless expanses of the frontier often bred men who acted without conscience. Allura could feel the tension coiling around them, quiet storm gathering that would test both her courage and Tavok's unwavering strength. And in the still hours of the night, when the fire crackled and shadows danced across the tent, Allura wondered, could a love like theirs survive the weight of the world outside, or would it be crushed under the judgment of those who saw only her face, not the heart behind it? The first real test came unexpectedly. A rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind him like a warning. Tuvok's eyes narrowed, and Allura felt the familiar tremor of fear she had learned to call caution. The rider approached fast, the kind of speed that carried danger in every hoofbeat. Allura clutched Tuvok's arm instinctively, the warmth of his hand giving her strength even as the unknown drew closer. The message the rider bore was simple, yet it shook their world. Red Mesa's judgment had arrived at their doorstep, and the choice Allura would make next could define not only her life, but the life of the man who had loved her when no one else dared. The plains stretched endlessly around them, the wind carrying both freedom and threat, and Allura realized with a sudden clarity that life would never be simple again. The love Tuvok offered was real, fiery, and unrelenting. But it existed in a world where outsiders were rarely welcome, and where survival often demanded more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. As the rider drew closer, Allura knew the story of her life. The one that had begun with whispers of shame and neglect was about to take a turn that would test her in ways she could never have imagined. And yet, despite the fear, a quiet fire burned in her chest. For the first time, she felt the strength of being truly seen, of being chosen not for what the world deemed beautiful, but for the soul she carried. Tuvok's hand tightened around hers, a promise unspoken but undeniable. And the wind carried with it the scent of distant rain, of change, and of a love that dared to defy the frontier itself. The plains waited silently, holding their secret, as Allura stepped forward into a future that could either break her or make her the woman she was always meant to be. The story was just beginning. Red Mesa would never see her the same way again. The rider came closer. A cloud of dust rising like a warning over the plains, and Allura felt her pulse quicken. Tuvok's eyes, sharp and steady, never left the approaching figure. He shifted slightly in front of her, a silent shield, and in that moment, Allura realized the depth of his strength. It was not just in his muscles or his skill with weapons, but in the quiet certainty of his presence. She had never known a man who could make her feel both protected and free at the same time. As the rider slowed and finally came into view, Allura could see the familiar face of Yarrick, a trader from Red Mesa who dealt in supplies and rumors alike. His eyes darted nervously between her and Tuvok, the weight of unspoken gossip pressing down on him as heavily as the sun overhead. "Allura," he called, voice careful, as if he feared the plains themselves might overhear. "You need to come back. Your father is not willing to wait any longer." Allura's stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed that returning to Red Mesa meant humiliation, scorn, the loss of the fragile freedom she had begun to taste with Tuvok. She glanced at him, hoping he would understand without words. Tuvok's hand brushed hers, a soft, grounding touch, and in that gesture lay the answer. They would face this together, whatever danger the town or her father might bring. Yarrick's horse whinnied nervously, as if sensing the tension between the two. "It's serious," he said again. "Your father, he says if you don't come back, he'll bring the whole town after you." The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. Allura clenched her fists, her heart pounding. For years she had endured whispers, judgment, and cruel smiles, but Tuvok had shown her something different, that a person could be valued for what they carried inside, for courage, for kindness, for heart. Could she abandon that for the fear of what others thought? Tuvok mounted his horse slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. "We will not run from who we are," he said, his voice low and steady. "If Red Mesa wishes to send its fear and anger after us, it will find us ready." Allura felt warmth bloom in her chest. Tuvok was not just a protector. He was a partner, a man who would face the storm with her, rather than leave her to its fury. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, the plains felt like a home, not a trap. As they rode toward the distant hills, Tuvok began to speak of the land beyond the camp, of places where the wind carried stories of bravery and love, where survival depended on more than judgment and appearance. "The world is wide," he said, "and it does not belong to those who shout the loudest or judge the fastest. It belongs to those who are willing to listen, to learn, and to act when the moment demands." Allura listened, the rhythm of the horse beneath her legs matching the rhythm of her racing thoughts. She had never known a world where she could belong, where she could matter. And now, for the first time, that world was opening before her, vast and uncharted. The night fell quickly, and the first stars began to pierce the deep blue of the sky. Tavak led them to a small clearing near a stream, the sound of running water, a soft melody against the vast silence of the plains. They made camp, the fire flickering and casting shadows that danced across their faces. Allura could see in Tavak's expression a combination of caution and hope. The man had lived through battles, through loss, through a world that demanded strength at every turn. Yet here he was, tender with her, patient, allowing her to find her own footing in a world that had always been cruel. As the fire crackled, Tavok told stories of his people, of ancestors who had roamed the plains with courage and wisdom. He spoke of battles won and lost, of love that defied expectation, and of traditions that honored not only the strong but the thoughtful, the brave, and the loyal. Allura listened, captivated, feeling the threads of a new life weaving around her, pulling her into a tapestry she had never imagined. In his stories, she found mirrors of her self-strength hidden behind quiet eyes, courage masked by silence, and a heart that could endure more than most ever expected. But the tension of the world they left behind never fully faded. Allura knew the whispers of Red Mesa would follow her, carried by traders, travelers, and winds that seemed to remember every slight. And Tavok, ever vigilant, watched the horizon as though he could see the shadow of every danger before it arrived. He taught her how to read the signs of the plains, the way birds moved, the scent of smoke in the wind, the subtle tremor of earth beneath hooves. Survival, he explained, was not just about strength. It was about awareness, patience, and trust. Trust in oneself, and trust in the one who stood beside you. Over the next days, their bond deepened. Allura discovered a joy in the simple rhythms of life with Tavok, the way he could make a campfire sing with. Just a flick of his hands, the way he moved through the world with confidence, respect, and a quiet pride that demanded neither praise nor fear. She began to understand that love was not just a spark of attraction, but a steady flame that could endure storms, ridicule, and uncertainty. And in Tavok's eyes, she began to see herself reflected not as the town had judged her, but as she truly was, brave, capable, and worthy of a love that would not bend to the shallow rules of beauty or approval. Yet even as they grew closer, the threat of Red Mesa loomed. Allura's father was a man driven by pride and fear, and he had allies who believed they could bend Tavok to the town's will. And while Tavok was strong, the world beyond the plains was full of men who would exploit weakness wherever they found it. Every shadow seemed a potential enemy, every whisper a prelude to conflict. Allura knew that the freedom she had found was fragile, and that the love she had begun to cherish could be tested in ways she could not yet foresee. One evening, as the fire burned low and the wind carried the scent of distant rain, Allura confided her fears to Tavok. "What if they come for us?" she asked, voice barely above the crackle of the flames. "What if I cannot protect you, or you cannot protect me?" Tavok's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "Then we face it together," he said simply. "Fear is the world's weapon. Love is ours. We will not let the world's judgment define what we are." The words settled in her chest like a stone of certainty, but the unease remained. The plains were vast and free, yet danger always lingered at the edges. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Allura realized that their story was only beginning. She had escaped the prison of her father's judgment, found a man who saw her worth, and tasted a life filled with possibility. Yet the world outside their camp would not wait quietly while she discovered love and courage. At the edge of the clearing, the sound of hooves on hard ground broke the silence, sharp and sudden. Tavok rose instantly, eyes narrowing, muscles coiled for action. Allura's heart leaped into her throat. She knew in that instant that their trial was about to begin. The peace of the plains would be tested by the shadows of Red Mesa and the cruelty of those who refused to see beyond appearances. And yet, even as fear tightened around her chest, she felt the steady pull of Tavok's hand, the reassurance of his presence. Whatever came, they would face it together. The plains held their breath as the riders approached, the wind carrying the scent of danger and change. Lyra drew a deep breath, the firelight reflecting in her dark eyes. She was no longer the girl Red Mesa had dismissed. She was Allura, chosen, seen, and loved in a way that defied the world's shallow judgments. And as the first figures emerged from the darkness, silhouetted against the horizon, she knew that the story of her life, fanned her love with Tavok, was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Would their love survive the storm? Or would the world of Red Mesa finally catch up to them, threatening everything they had built together? The answer lay hidden in the shadows of the night, waiting for the dawn. The first light of dawn cut across the plains like a blade, illuminating the footprints in the dust that marked the rider's approach the night before. Allura woke to the sound of Tavok already moving, his eyes scanning the horizon, muscles tensed like a coiled spring. She had learned to read him well enough to know when danger lingered unseen. Something about the way he watched the hills, the slightest shift of the wind against the tall grass, told her that Red Mesa's shadow had stretched farther than they had imagined. Allura rose quietly, brushing the dust from her skirt, and felt a mix of fear and determination. She had known since childhood that the world could be cruel, that whispers could wound deeper than any blade. But here, with Tavok by her side, she felt a fire kindling within her that refused to be extinguished. Tavok noticed her movement and gave a small nod, the unspoken acknowledgement that they would face whatever came, together. The camp stirred as Tavok mounted his horse and gestured for Allura to follow. The plains seemed quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that carried secrets. Tavok's mind was already tracing paths through the hills, imagining escape routes, potential ambushes, and ways to keep Allura safe. She noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the reins. And she understood that the world beyond their small clearing was ready to test them. Their ride took them along the edge of a river that twisted like a silver ribbon across the plains. Tavok spoke little, but his presence filled the space, a steady heartbeat that guided her through fear and uncertainty. Allura's thoughts drifted back to Red Mesa, her father's sharp words, the harsh laughter of neighbors, and the whispers that had once told her she was unworthy. Each memory was a weight she could no longer carry, yet it fueled a determination she had never known. She would not let the world define her, not now, not ever. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a rocky outcrop, overlooking a wide valley. Tavok halted, scanning the distant tree line. "They are coming," he said finally, voice low and tense. "Not just your father, Allura. Others from the town have joined him. They believe they can control what they do not understand." Allura felt a chill. The reality of her choice settled over her like a storm cloud. She had chosen love, freedom, and the unknown. And the world of Red Mesa was not willing to let her go. Meanwhile, far back in the town, her father Malric paced nervously. His anger and pride battled with worry, for he could not deny the rumors that Tavok was a man unlike any he had seen. Malric had been a man of rules and judgment, and yet Tavok's reputation as a warrior who commanded respect even among his own people had unsettled him. "He thinks he can take her from me," Malric muttered, fists clenching. "He will learn that no man crosses me without consequence." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt passed through his mind. Could Tavok's strength and quiet determination actually protect Allura in ways he never could? That thought unsettled him more than any fear of shame. Back in the plains, Allura felt the tension between past and present pressing in on her. She thought of the life she had left behind, quiet streets filled with judgment, cold nights spent hiding from cruel laughter, and compared it with this raw, open world that Tavok had shared with her. Here she could ride across the plains, feel the wind on her face, and hear the stories of people whose hearts were as wide as the horizon. But danger lingered. Every rustle of grass, every distant sound of hoofbeats, reminded her that freedom was fragile. Tavok led her through a narrow canyon, shadows stretching like hands across the stone walls. "We cannot face them head-on," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed concern. "They expect fear, they expect weakness. We will give them neither." Allura tightened her grip on her horse's reins, the rhythm of its gallop matching the rhythm of her racing heart. She trusted Tavok, yes, but the unknown pressed in with a weight that made every step forward feel like a gamble. As they reached a small grove, Tavok finally allowed a moment of rest. Allura dismounted, letting the horse graze, and for the first time that morning, allowed herself a deep breath. Tavok joined her, crouching beside the stream to cup water in his hands. "You have courage, Allura," he said softly. "Not the kind that is loud or proud, but the kind that survives whispers, solitude, and fear. Da 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 da. That courage will carry us through what comes. Allura looked into his eyes and felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet certainty that whatever storm approached, they would face it together. But danger had its own rhythm. Shadows moved along the ridges above them, and Allura sensed eyes watching. She had grown to trust the wind and the subtle signs of life in the plains, and all of it whispered that they were not alone. Tavok noticed, too, tensing muscles coiled. The world of Red Mesa was approaching, carrying judgment, anger, and fear wrapped in every step. Allura felt a surge of adrenaline and determination. She would not run.
Not now.
Not ever. As the day waned, Tavok and Allura moved quietly through the valley, careful to stay hidden among rocks and trees. The further they went, the more Allura began to understand Tavok's world, the balance of respect, strength, and patience that governed life beyond the town's narrow streets. Here, survival depended not on judgment or beauty, but on awareness, trust, and courage. And Allura felt herself changing, growing into the woman Tavok had seen from the start, the woman the town had never dared to notice. Yet the threat of Red Mesa was never far. Malric had rallied a small group, determined to retrieve his daughter and restore the town's honor, or what he perceived as honor. Among them was Kalen, a man known for his sharp tongue and sharper temper, whose bitterness toward Allura had grown over the years. He moved through the hills with the confidence of someone who believed fear could control hearts. But Tavok had prepared for this. Every movement, every choice along the plains was calculated, a silent strategy to stay ahead of those who sought to impose their will. As dusk fell, the first skirmish came in whispers, a distant shout, a flash of movement against the hills. Tavok's eyes narrowed, and Allura instinctively ducked behind a rock. Her pulse raced, but she could feel the strength of Tavok beside her, the steady assurance of his presence. This was not just survival, it was a test of everything they had built together, the trust, the courage, and the bond that had begun to bloom like a hidden flower in the harsh landscape of the frontier. Allura thought of her father again, of the town's judgment, and of the life she had left behind. None of it mattered here. Here she was more than whispers and fear. She was a woman loved deeply, a partner in a struggle that demanded courage, and a soul determined to defy a world that had never understood her. Yet the danger remained, pressing closer with every heartbeat. The plains held their secrets, the night carried threats, and Red Mesa's shadow lingered just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they huddled by the fire that night, Tavok finally allowed himself a rare word of reassurance. "We will not be broken," he said softly, voice carrying over the crackle of flames. "They cannot touch what is true between us, but we must be ready. The night is long and the world does not forgive easily." Allura nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into her bones. She had known hardship, judgment, and fear, but now she knew something stronger. Love that dared, courage that endured, and a life she would fight for with every breath. Yet the distant hills remained alive with movement, shadows slipping through the rocks, whispers carried by the wind.
Allura?
Could feel the coming storm, the inevitable clash between the world that sought to control her and the love that refused to bow. And as she lay beneath the stars, Tavok's hand resting over hers, she realized that the battle for her heart, her freedom, and their future had only just begun. The plains were vast, the night was deep, and the story of Allura and Tavok's love was far from over. The world of Red Mesa would not wait, and neither would the secrets and dangers hidden in the wind, ready to test the bond they had begun to forge. The love that had blossomed amidst fear and judgment now faced its greatest challenge. And the coming days would demand every ounce of courage, trust, and heart they possessed. The night was thick and heavy, the kind of darkness that seemed to press against the skin and settle deep into the bones. Allura lay beside Tavok in the small clearing they had chosen for shelter, her hands still intertwined with his. The fire was nothing more than glowing embers, flickering against the shadows of trees and rocks. Every rustle of the grass, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified in the stillness, carrying a warning she could not ignore. She felt the tension like a living thing, coiled and ready to strike, yet in Tavok's steady presence, a small part of her dared to breathe. Tavok's gaze swept the surrounding hills constantly. His instincts were sharp, trained by years of life on the plains where danger was as common as the wind. "They will come," he said quietly, his voice low, but steady enough to calm her trembling hands. "Red Mesa will not rest until they have their answer." Allura swallowed hard. She had left behind the town that mocked her, the father who saw her as nothing more than a burden, yet now she understood that judgment and fear had a way of chasing even the bravest hearts. The moon rose high, pale and cold, reflecting on the surface of the stream that wound near their camp. Shadows moved on the distant hills, figures waiting, watching, calculating. Allura shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization that the confrontation was inevitable. She turned to Tavok, whose expression was calm, almost unreadable, but she could see the tension in his jaw and the slight narrowing of his dark eyes. Every muscle was poised for action, every thought anticipating the coming storm. She had never felt more alive and more terrified in the same instant. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional cry of a night bird or the distant rustle of leaves. Then the first signs of movement reached them, small flashes of light far in the hills. The reflection of torches, the sound of muted voices carried by the wind. Tavok's hand tightened over hers, and Allura felt the pulse of his strength, a lifeline in the darkness. "They are closer than I thought," he whispered. "Soon we will have no choice but to confront them." Her stomach turned at the words, but her heart also thudded with a strange exhilaration. Everything she had endured, every harsh word, every lonely day in Red Mesa, had led her to this moment, a moment where courage and love would be tested together. Allura thought of Malric, her father, pacing nervously in the town. She imagined the fear and fury in his eyes, the way pride twisted his concern into something harsh and dangerous. And then she thought of Kalen, the man who had spent years mocking her, believing he could dictate her life. Their shadows loomed over her even now, even in the safety Tavok had created. She knew that beyond the hills, beyond the trees, a storm of anger and expectation waited, and there would be no turning back once it broke upon them. Tavok moved with silent precision, leading Allura to a narrow ridge overlooking the valley where the Red Mesa group was gathering. From their hidden vantage point, she could see the figures below, dozens, armed with rifles, ropes, and anger, eyes gleaming with the certainty that they were right, that they could bend her to the will of. The town? Her pulse raced as the weight of their numbers pressed down on her, yet Tavok's presence beside her was like an anchor. He did not speak unnecessarily. His focus was complete, a calm storm of calculation and strength. Allura's thoughts flickered to their life together in the short weeks they had known each other, the rides across the plains, the quiet conversations by the fire, the lessons in survival and trust Tavok had shared. She had begun to feel a love that was fierce, unwavering, and impossible to deny. Yet the fear of losing it, of the world tearing apart the fragile bond they had formed, made her stomach twist. She had never imagined that love could feel so fragile, so vital, and so dangerous all at once. The first sign of the confrontation came in the form of a shouted order from below. Kellen's voice rang across the valley, harsh and commanding. "We will take her back," he called, the echo bouncing off the rocks like thunder. "No Apache will have what belongs to Red Mesa." Allura felt a surge of anger at the words. They were hers, not a prize to be claimed, yet she understood the danger they posed. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything could be lost. Tavok's hand brushed hers, a subtle reassurance that steadied her. "Remember," he murmured, "we fight together, or not at all. Fear will give them power, courage will give us the world." Allura drew a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to anchor herself in the rhythm of his words. They had trained, prepared, and survived more than most could imagine. But the final test was upon them, and there was no guarantee of victory. The night deepened, and with it, the tension grew. Shadows crept closer along the ridges, torches flickering like fireflies in the distance. Allura could hear the faint hum of voices, the movement of boots against rocks and soil, and the occasional clink of metal. Every sound made her heart leap. Every movement sent a shiver down her spine. Yet Tavok's hand in hers reminded her that she was not alone, that the love that had blossomed in the quiet moments of the plains was now a shield as strong as any wall or weapon. Suddenly, the first clash rang out a shout, a rock thrown, a horse's panicked whinny. Allura's heart pounded as Tavok moved instinctively, pulling her behind a boulder and assessing the threat. The Red Mesa group was cautious, testing their defense, probing for weakness. Allura could feel her own fear mixing with adrenaline, sharpening her senses, making every movement precise, every sound meaningful. She had never felt so alive, so aware of every detail, so connected to the man who had chosen her when no one else dared. As the night stretched on, the confrontation escalated. Figures moved in and out of the shadows, the flash of rifles and the glint of knives appearing like sparks in the darkness. Tavok's leadership was silent but commanding. He directed Allura with gestures and subtle guidance, keeping them hidden yet ready. Allura discovered a new strength within herself, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to trust her instincts, to act when every heartbeat screamed caution. She was no longer the girl of Red Mesa, dismissed and ridiculed. She was a woman who could fight for love, for freedom, for the life she had chosen. The distant shouts grew louder as Malric and Kalen realized that Tavok would not surrender his bride. Allura saw the flash of anger in her father's eyes, a mixture of fear, pride, and desperation. He had never understood her courage, and now he faced it firsthand. Every plan he had, every assumption he had made about what she would do, was unraveling before him. And yet he could not act too rashly, for Tavok was more than a man, he was a force, disciplined, patient, and unyielding. Allura's hand remained in Tavok's, their fingers laced tightly, a silent promise against the chaos around them. She realized that this night, this confrontation, was not just about survival, it was about proving the truth of their love, about showing that judgment and fear could not dictate their lives. Every shadow, every movement, every whispered command carried the weight of the moment. And she felt her heart rise and fall with every breath of wind that swept across the plains. The night seemed endless. Every moment stretched into an eternity as the tension built to a breaking point. Figures circled, torches cast jagged shadows, and the air carried the scent of dust, sweat, and the threat of violence. Allura could hear Tavok's steady breathing beside her, feel the strength of his arm, and know that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Yet the outcome remained uncertain, the danger immediate, and the storm of Red Mesa's anger pressing ever closer. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Allura and Tavok crouched behind rocks, their eyes fixed on the approaching group. Every second was laden with anticipation, every heartbeat echoing the tension of the plains. They had trained, survived, and grown together, but the final test loomed like a mountain in the morning mist. Allura could feel the weight of her past, the town's judgment, and the uncertainty of what the day might bring, pressing on her like the endless wind across the plains. And still, despite the fear, despite the looming threat, despite the chaos waiting just beyond the ridge, she felt something undeniable. A love fierce enough to face the storm, courage strong enough to meet the world head-on, and a heart ready to defy every expectation. The plains held their breath, the Red Mesa riders advanced, and the story of Allura and Tavok teetered on the edge of the moment that would define everything. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the plains and illuminating the valley where tension had held its breath through the long night. Allura tightened her grip on Tavok's hand, the warmth of his presence grounding her, even as the Red Mesa riders crested the hill. Their faces were a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief, but Tavok's calm stance, his quiet command over the land, seemed to unnerve even the boldest of them. Allura realized in that moment that courage was more than weapons, and numbers it was presence, conviction, and love that refused to bend. Malric, her father, rode forward, his pride and fear warring across his face. "Allura," shouted, the tension in his voice cracking like a whip. "This ends now. Return with me or your life will be in danger." Allura's heart ached at the sight of him, a man she had once loved and feared, now standing at the edge of the plains with judgment heavy in his eyes. She glanced at Tavok, whose dark eyes met hers with understanding and strength. They had faced the storm together, and now they had to face the moment of choice, the turning point that would decide the lives of everyone present. Tavok stepped forward, his voice carrying across the quiet plains. "Malric," he said, steady and calm, "Allura belongs with no one but herself. You may have tried to control her, to define her worth, but she has chosen her life. She has chosen love, courage, and freedom." His words landed like stones, heavy with truth. and Allura saw the tension in her father's shoulders, the way his hands clenched at the reins. For the first time, she realized that Tavik had not just protected her from the world, he had shown her that the world could be confronted without fear. Kalen, the man who had spent years mocking and belittling her, stepped forward next. "You think she belongs to you, Apache?" He spat, his arrogance mixed with disbelief. "She's ours, by law and by blood." Tavok's gaze did not waver. No law grants control over another's heart, and the blood she carries does not define her worth. The words rang across the valley, a quiet declaration that carried more power than any sword or rifle. Allura felt a surge of strength rise in her chest. The fear that had shadowed her for years' mockery, whispers, judgment, fell away like dust in the wind. She could see the lines of doubt creeping across the faces of the Red Mesa men, their certainty shaken by Tavok's unwavering stance. And she realized, with a clarity she had never known, that love was not a prize to be won or a life to be claimed. It was a choice, a commitment, a fire that burned in defiance of fear and expectation. Her father's face softened, the anger and pride giving way to a flicker of understanding. I wanted to protect you," Malric said, voice quiet now, carrying the weight of years of misunderstanding. "I only wanted you safe." Allura felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it was not sorrow, it was relief, and a strange tenderness toward the man who had, in his own flawed way, tried to guide her. "I am safe," she said, voice steady, "because I am with someone who sees me, who values me for who I am, not what others say I should be." Tavok moved closer, his hand brushing hers, a quiet reassurance that anchored her in the moment. The Red Mesa riders murmured among themselves, the realization dawning that they had underestimated both the strength of the plains and the bond between these two souls. One by one, they lowered their weapons, the tension easing as respect, or at least acknowledgement, replaced the fear and arrogance that had driven them. As the sun climbed higher, Malric finally nodded, his pride and worry giving way to a hesitant acceptance. "Perhaps I was wrong," he said softly, eyes meeting Allura's with a mixture of love and regret. "Perhaps. Strength and heart cannot be measured in the ways I once believed." Allura felt a lightness in her chest she had never known, a sense of closure not just for herself but for the tangled threads of family, judgment, and expectation that had followed her all her life. Kalen, though reluctant, also stepped back, the fire of his anger dimmed by the undeniable truth of the love and courage standing before him. He had sought to control her, to dictate her life, and yet he could see that the bond between Allura and Tavik was not something to be challenged, was something to be respected, even if grudgingly. Allura felt a thrill of relief, tempered with awareness that the world would always hold challenges, but that the most important battles, the ones of love, courage, and choice, had been won. Tavok turned to Allura, his dark eyes reflecting the sunlight like polished stone, steady and unwavering. "The world will always judge," he said, voice soft but strong. "But we choose what matters. Always, Allura." Allura smiled, a tear catching the light on her cheek, and she knew that the fears and doubts of the past had no hold on them now. The plains stretched endlessly around them, open and free, a promise of life beyond the narrow limits of Red Mesa. Together, they rode through the valley, the wind whipping past them as if celebrating their triumph. Allura leaned close to Tavik, feeling the rhythm of his horse, the steadiness of his heart, the warmth of his presence. She realized that love was not simply found, it was forged through trials, tested by fear, strengthened by courage, and chosen every day. And in that choice, she found her freedom, her strength, and her place in a world that had once tried to define her by appearances and whispers. The plains themselves seemed to breathe with them, the golden grass waving in the wind, as if in approval. Tavak's hand rested over hers, a silent promise of protection, partnership, and unwavering love. Allura felt the weight of the past lift, replaced with a hope that stretched as wide as the horizon. All may well. Every whisper, every judgment, every painful memory became part of the story that had brought her here, to this moment of triumph, courage, and love. As the day unfolded, Malric followed at a respectful distance, silent in reflection, watching the life of his daughter take form in ways he had never imagined. The town of Red Mesa would carry the story of Allura and Tavik, a story of courage and love that refused to bow to fear or judgment. The whispers that once mocked her would be replaced with awe as the tale of the girl who had found strength. Freedom and love beyond the boundaries of a narrow world spread through the plains. Allura looked at Tavok, eyes bright with tears and sunlight, and whispered, "I never imagined life could feel like this." Tavok smiled, dark eyes softening with warmth. "Life is vast, Allura, and it is ours to choose. Fear may visit, but love will endure, stronger than anything the world throws at us." She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the beat of his heart in sync with hers, a rhythm that promised endurance, courage, and infinite possibility. As they rode together across the endless plains, Allura realized that the past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had found love that dared to defy judgment, courage that had been tested by fear, and a life she had chosen with intention and heart. The world was vast, the plains stretched endlessly, and she knew that with Tavok by her side, there was no horizon too far. No challenge too great, and no shadow that could dim the fire of what they had built together. The sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, painting the sky in colors that mirrored the intensity of their journey. Allura and Tavok rode side by side, hands intertwined, hearts steady in the knowledge that their love had survived fear, judgment, and the harshest of trials. And as the stars began to appear one by one, Allura whispered softly, "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Tavok smiled, his voice a low rumble against the wind. "Yes, Allura. But from here on, it is ours to shape, ours to protect, and ours to cherish." The plains stretched wide, alive with the promise of tomorrow, carrying with them a story of love, courage, and the power of being seen and chosen. Allura had once been dismissed, mocked, and undervalued, but now she rode through the open world with a man who loved her, with a depth no one else had dared. And in that love, in that freedom, in the endless rhythm of the wind and the stars, she found the truest reflection of herself, ready to face the future with Tavok, side by side, fearless and unstoppable. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the plains whispered their approval. Carrying the story of Allura and Tavok across the land, a tale of courage, love, and the triumph of the heart over fear. The world would remember, the winds would carry it, and the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter in their honor. Love had won, courage had endured, and a life of freedom, choice. The devotion stretched endlessly ahead, full of promise and endless adventure.